Tonight, I want to share two topics with you. One is the spread of Christianity in Africa through the centuries. And the second is the rise of African American churches. As we celebrate Black History Month, let us be encouraged and inspired by how God has ministered to the lives of melanated people. So let me now share my screen for the first topic, which is the spread of Christianity in Africa. My first topic is the spread of Christianity in Africa. The gospel penetrated Africa long before the arrival of European missionaries. Therefore, historically, it's just inaccurate to say that Christianity is simply a white man's religion. Christianity in Africa actually began in Egypt around AD 50, when, according to tradition, Mark the evangelist traveled to Alexandria, Egypt from Jerusalem. On this map, I have depicted the journey from Jerusalem to Alexandria, Egypt, with a red arrow. So Mark brought the gospel to Northern Africa around the same time, or possibly even before Christianity spread to Northern Europe. By the end of the 2nd century, Christianity had spread to Carthage, which is now Tunisia. Once again, I have depicted the journey to Carthage with a red arrow. As we move into the 3rd century, the most influential Christian thinkers emerged from North Africa. African theologians like Tertullian and Origen gave the church some of its most basic theological vocabulary and theological concepts. Tertullian was from Carthage and Origen was from Alexandria. Let me say a few things about Tertullian. Tertullian is called the father of Latin Christianity. He coined the term Trinitas. That's a Latin term from which we get the English word Trinity. So he gave us that term. He also gave us the vocabulary to help us characterize God as one essence or one substance in 3 persons. So when we hear that language today, that God is one essence, so there's one God eternally existent in 3 persons, we got that language from Tertullian. Origen, also another African theologian, he elevated the authority of Scripture and stressed the importance of careful exegesis. Now, Origen held that there was a literal meaning of the text, a moral meaning of the text, and also a spiritual meaning of the text. Now, sometimes he went too far with some of his allegorical interpretations of the Bible. But if we're going to create a list of influential African theologians, then we must put Origen on that list. The 4th century also saw the emergence of major theologians. The African theologian Athanasius, for example, was a major defender of Trinitarian orthodoxy. He argued against another African bishop named Arius at the Council of Nicaea in 325. Athanasius helped the church to articulate that Jesus Christ is eternally divine. He is co-equal with God the Father. He is co-eternal, and he is consubstantial, or of the same substance with God the Father. And of course, one of the most dominant theologians of the early first few centuries of the church is St. Augustine. He became the Bishop of Hippo in North Africa in 395. Now, He is probably considered one of the most influential theologians affecting the Reformation. He's claimed by both Catholics and Protestants as the source of their theology. He's one of the preeminent teachers of the Christian church, and he was a dark-skinned African theologian. And so in summary, we have Tertullian, who gave us the concept of the Trinity. We have Origen, who helped us with our biblical interpretation. Athanasius, who helped us to articulate the reality of Jesus Christ as being eternally divine. And Augustine, who was such a monumental figure that he must finish off our list. Now, so my main point then is that indigenous Africans played important roles in shaping the Christian tradition. And so with that, I want to introduce you to a book that some of you may have heard of, but many of you will not have heard of it. But it's a great book by Thomas Oden called How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind. And so Oden's main point is that Christianity is not a recent addition to religion in Africa. Oden is actually Caucasian, and he's a former professor at Drew University. But he wants to stress in his work the importance of African theologians to the shaping of Christianity. Let me share with you a quote from the book. Oden says, "Some scholars of African culture have regrettably acquired a persistent habit of assuming that Christianity began in Africa only a couple centuries ago, strictly imported from the West or the North. They appear to view Africa as only 2 or 3 centuries deep, not 2 or 3 millennia. This false start is repeated frequently in some well-intended African theological literature. Even the best African theologians have been tempted to fall into the stereotype that Christianity came from Europe. This is a narrow modern view of history, ignoring Christianity's first millennium, when African thought shaped and conditioned virtually every diocese in Christianity worldwide. Once in North Africa, Christianity spread west from Alexandria, Egypt, and east to Ethiopia. On this map, Egypt, where Alexandria is a city, is in green, and Ethiopia is in orange. The early church in North Africa went through several severe persecutions. Many of you are familiar with the various persecutions that the church went through in church history. But from around AD 64 to AD 311, the church went through, as I said, tremendous, severe persecution. Yet, in spite of persecution and martyrdom, the church kept growing. Christianity often was embraced as the religion of opposition against the expanding Roman Empire. In the 4th century, the Ethiopian king Ezana, he made Christianity the official religion of Ethiopia. Around that time in 312, the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity fully legal. And then a few decades later, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I would make Christianity the actual official religion of the Roman Empire. And so in 312, we have Constantine making Christianity legal and almost the official religion. A few decades later, Theodosius I makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. But in Ethiopia, right, King Ezana makes Christianity the official religion of that nation. So the spread of Christianity throughout Egypt and North Africa during the first 5 centuries of the church was intense, despite the prevalence of false teachings and persecutions and martyrdom. At the start of the 7th century AD, the Coptic or the Egyptian church had established itself as the national church of Egypt, and it had penetrated every region of the nation of Egypt. Now, in the 7th century, Islam became a major competitor to Christianity. However, Christianity still remained the chosen religion of Ethiopia, and it persisted in pockets of North Africa. But an influx of Muslims into the continent of Africa during the Middle Ages resulted in an exponential increase in Islamic converts, and many African Christians fled to other nations around the world. Now, there were some missionary efforts during that time by the Roman Catholics and the European Protestant churches. So they reclaimed some ground for Christ during that time, but Islam was really pushing hard after the 7th century. Now, in the 15th century, Christianity came to sub-Saharan Africa with the arrival of the Portuguese. In the south of the continent, the Dutch founded the beginnings of the Dutch Reformed Church in 1652. In the 16th century, the African continent was assaulted by the demonic practices associated with the slave trade. So we're going to discuss slavery more in the second video. After the 16th century, African religion remained pretty much undisturbed until around the 19th century. So people practiced their own indigenous religions. But if we fast forward to today, in a relatively short time, Africa has gone from having a majority of followers of traditional religions to being predominantly a continent of Christians and Muslims. From my survey of the various estimates, today, Christianity is the largest religion in Africa. About 48% of the African population is Christian. About 40% is Muslim. About 10% or so are adherents to some other belief or no belief. But we're going to stop here. In the next video, I'm going to shift my discussion from the continent of Africa to North America. And we're going to look at the rise of African American churches. See you shortly.